Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait a couple of minutes because we know some people will be trickling in. If you need to grab coffee or grab some tea or some water, now would be the best time to do so. We'll be starting in two minutes, everyone. Okay, it is now 1:05. We will start officially. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Civic Engagement webinar. This webinar is being presented to you by the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Alumni Association's DC chapter. My name is Jasmin Chavez, and I am the Director of Engagement for the chapter. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be made available next week if you guys want to watch it afterwards. There will be time at the end to submit questions for the Q&A. We encourage you all to submit your questions using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of the Zoom app. We will do our best to try to address as many questions as possible, time permitting, but please feel free to put in your questions there. A little bit about myself. I also serve as the LULAC Deputy Director for the state of Virginia. I am originally from El Salvador, and I currently work at an immigration law firm here in Washington, D.C. I grew up organizing my community in Falls Church, Virginia, so this discussion is very close to my heart. It's very important to me. Right now, it is critical that we help each other get involved because we have an election coming up, and we need to make our voices heard now more than ever. Now it is my honor to introduce our speaker for today, my good friend Jose Ignacio Gaona. Jose has a passion for working with the Latino community and has done so across the United States, serving on various boards of nonprofit organizations. His track record and evident community impact are clear indicators of his ability and expertise. Jose has founded 2 startups, Adelante Latino, LLC, a nonprofit consulting firm, and Nuestra América Noticias, a digital media content company focused on connecting young Latin people across the US and Latin America. In 2018, Jose was the youngest national policy and advocacy manager for the League of United Latin American Citizens, the country's largest and oldest Latino organization. This year, Jose had the honor of being the youngest senior staff member on the Bernie 2020 campaign, focusing on state operations and Latinx constituency outreach nationwide. Jose is also a very good friend of mine. We did a lot of volunteer work for LULAC back when we were in college, and he is the person I go to when I'm thinking of creating something that'll help our community. Jose, would you like to say a couple of words?
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. And thank you everybody who's joining online. I see folks are still trickling in. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Like you said, Jasmine, I've been working with community organizations, both civic organizations and community service organizations for a number of years. And this conversation is very much due right now. There's a lot that's happening in our country and in our world. I think the only thing that I would add prior to us starting the conversation on civic engagement within our community's lens is the current state of the country, right? I think it's important for us to recognize that right now there is a huge social movement happening outside, literally right outside, right? All over the country. And the world. We're seeing Black Lives Matter protests, demonstrations, and mobilization efforts in ways that we've never seen them before. And while I won't be able to personally speak to the organizing of the Black Lives Matter movement, I just want to recognize that. I think it's really important for us to recognize that right now because it is very pertinent to the Latino community. Because we also suffer at the hands of police brutality and policing fears in our community, right? More so related to immigration forces, but it's something that's important to recognize. It won't be something that I'll necessarily be talking about personally, but I know that you have something to say about that as well for future discussion. So I wanted to make sure that we spoke about it and that I recognized its importance. By leaving it out of my personal, testimony and my words today, I don't mean to disregard its importance because it's incredibly important. And I know I myself am following it very closely as it continues to manifest across the country. And I hope everybody else is as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. I was talking to Jose about this earlier, but I'm organizing a webinar with someone who is very active in the Black Lives Matter movement for a webinar that I'm going to have in a couple of weeks. So please, I did want to have someone for the discussion today, but my friend was at a protest, so for the next few weeks I'll be organizing something with him so that he can talk to us a little bit about what the Latinx community can do to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Sorry for that. So okay, let's dive right into the conversation, Jose. My first question for you would be, let's talk about civic engagement and what it looked like before COVID-19. I mean, we're social distancing right now. We can't really see people. What did it look like before this?
Uh, I think this question is the big question, right? I think as young people started to organize in 2016 in the wake of the Trump presidency, we saw a lot of digital tactics start to really grow in the organizing sphere. We've seen social media movements, really take the helm of young movements, right? The Sunrise Movement, various different social issues have been brought forward. Gun violence in schools, specifically with high school students. So I think there was definitely a manifestation of, a new type of campaigning and organizing, digital, that was starting to take hold of younger generations before COVID-19. I speak from personal experience. I think that a lot of the national organizations that we can think of that are really also at the forefront, especially here in Washington, D.C., of some of these conversations, we're still catching up. It's not easy to catch up to digital organizing, specifically for folks that maybe have been organizing for a long time and are having to learn new tactics. And so I think there was already a start to this digital media medium of organizing and campaign work. But I think COVID very much forced us to adapt, right? A community organization that is working on gun control, or a community group that's working on immigration reform, is not going to stop reaching out to people and engaging community members and politicians and leaders just because they can't meet with them face to face. And so it was very much a quick adaptation that people had to undergo, right, to continue the work that they were doing prior to COVID-19. What did that work look like? I think there's really two prongs that you look at, right? When you talk about organizing or getting involved, civic engagement, you have community organizing, which we can get into a little bit later, and political campaigning, right? I think in a traditional sense, political campaigning is working to get an individual elected or working towards a specific policy issue, in some to some degree in the same way, working within a political institution. Whereas community organizing is more focused on the actual demographic, right? Your constituency. And so I think those are the two spheres that have really had to deal with that adaptation. We were spending years together organizing within the LULAC structure and other Latinx community structures, and a lot of our work entailed getting out into the community, right? Talking to folks one-on-one, holding town halls, holding press conferences, or community actions. And I just came off of the Bernie campaign, and so we very much lived through that shift, right? At the very beginning of the Bernie campaign, we were focusing on door knocking and on getting out with the community and really being present, right? I mean, the Bernie campaign, this is where I flex a little bit. The Bernie campaign had thousands and thousands upon thousands of organizers all over the United States and Puerto Rico, which I'm very proud of. And so we were making community contact. The moment that COVID-19 started to spread beyond just the dozen cases that we had in what was it now, early March, I think. We had to shut down the entire operation. In essence, we had to shut down the entire person-to-person operation and completely restructure the way that we were reaching hundreds of thousands of people every day. So it's a huge shift from what we were doing before. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we might be moving into the next line of questioning. So I'll take it back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jose. That leads into my next question. So, and you talked about this a little bit already, but what, in your opinion, did COVID-19 do to the civic engagement climate?
In addition to forcing community leaders and organizations and campaigns to adapt very quickly, I think it also had a very interesting impact on young communities' voices, because suddenly you have this generational learning curve of Gen Zers, which we're almost at the cusp of, being at the forefront of this digital organizing, and having been so for the last couple of years, moving forward, agendas, community issue agendas, or political campaigns. And suddenly, every other generation, older generation, millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, are having to catch up to this, modern medium of organizing and campaigning. And so there was definitely a learning curve there. And I think that's absolutely done something for younger generations that had the upper hand going into this scenario that we're now dealing with COVID-19, where we cannot talk face to face, we cannot canvass traditionally, right? We can't knock on doors and hand out pamphlets, and so I think there's definitely an impact in that regard as well, speaking within the different generations that have had to adapt. And we've all seen it. We've seen it with politicians, both in the United States and abroad. We've seen it with community organizers. The older, it's becoming a bit of a stereotype in this time, but the older individual who is working a Zoom call, and maybe they don't know how to mute themselves, or they didn't really know how to use the camera, and so it's these little stutters, right, of different generations having to catch up to some of these new platforms that have now become the norm, like Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Jose. So COVID-19 hit, and a lot of people have found themselves trying to do more for their community, even though we're supposed to be social distancing, even though we're supposed to keep our distance and make sure that no one gets sick. What can people do now to be civically engaged from their homes, in your opinion?
I think a lot of us within the realm of activism, a lot of the folks that have worked, in some of the areas that we've worked, are asking themselves this question. I know that I was very much asking myself this question, and I think this is the time for an anecdote, right? I was in March, I was in Puerto Rico, working to lead the Bernie campaign's operation on the island. And we were, within a time span of days, we were just growing this island operation tremendously, right? Hundreds of volunteers all over Puerto Rico to go out and touch communities. And in the moment that they told us, one, that the COVID-19 was spreading, and that we would have to tremendously limit the way that we were interacting with people, and then just a couple of days later that we would have to evacuate the island entirely, and continue the operation remotely, field organizers and all. You had to go through a really strenuous and rapid readjustment. And so I very much had to really sit down and think, well, how do you change this model, right? Which has been so so successful, right? Specifically with Latinx constituencies. We saw it with Bernie Sanders in Nevada and California. And so it's difficult. I don't know if there is, a specific right or wrong as to how to organize or how to campaign during COVID-19. But I think that we can use some of those mediums, right? These digital mediums to move the ball forward, so to speak, for our campaigns. Just because you're stuck at home doesn't mean that you can't, reach out to a campaign, and we'll be giving off some names a little bit later of how folks can get engaged. Just because you're stuck at home doesn't mean that you can't, reach out to an organization and do a phone bank from home, right? If you have the extra time. It doesn't mean that you can't participate in panel discussions like this one. And it doesn't mean that you can't, talk to your friends and to your neighbors and all of your social media networks about important issues or important elections, right? I think education is important, and really understanding that the resources that we have in our phone to connect with people are critical in this time to move our campaigns forward.
Thank you for that, Jose. I also want to add on that if campaigning isn't your thing, you can also do voter registration drives from your own house. And the way in which you can do that is you can just send the link, the official government link, to your friends, to your neighbors, register them to vote virtually so that our voices are heard during the election that's coming up. So yeah, thank you for that, Jose. And my last question is, what is the future of civic engagement post-COVID-19?
I think that's also a very large question, but I think there is absolutely something to be said for this adaptation that folks have now, undergone to adjust to COVID-19. COVID-19 is going to have, implications on our society for generations to come, right? In the way that society at large interacts with itself, I think we're going to be seeing shifts to a large degree in the way that, we think about sanitation and social distancing and, a lot of these terms for years to come. Speaking about, specifically community organizing and campaigning, I think that consciousness is not going to go away as either, right? And I think, and I hope that what this does for political campaigns and organizers and community leaders is it kind of forces them to recognize that you cannot be successful anymore in the 21st century if you're not activating communities digitally. There are, and I want to be also, very straightforward in saying that, there is a problem with some of our communities, specifically the Latinx community, with regards to connectivity. It's still a problem that we see. We don't all have, these devices to make those connections, but a lot of the Latinx community does, right? A very large percentage, proportionally speaking, of the Latinx community is connected to internet and to these social media through their phone, right? And so that needs to become a part of the strategy in the way that we engage individuals for political campaigns and for community organizing. And so I hope that in the future, and again, I really do think we might, that we see more of this, right, as the norm. I think it's the one, one of the silver linings of this this larger pandemic issue. That and some of the organizing that we're seeing, right? I mean, folks are very conscious of the pandemic, and yet we still have thousands of people on the street all over the country, right? In every major metropolitan area. But if you look at those protesters, they are not shoulder to shoulder. They are practicing social distancing. They are wearing protective gear to make sure that, you know, they limit the spread of the virus. And so COVID-19 as a global pandemic has not stopped, you know, this very visual demonstration, right? And again, I can't speak to, you know, what it is right now to organize within the Black Lives Matter scene, but I mean, we're seeing it firsthand, right? Folks are not stopping, you know, their protests. Folks are still out there, and so, you know, I think we'll still need some of that in the future. But we need to also take advantage of some of these digital mediums that we're now adopting and keep them. And I think one more thing to add, and I'm going to do a little plug in here. There's also a lot that you can do for your community digitally, right? I've been seeing incredibly successful fundraisers and funds organized all over the United States and Latin America for marginalized communities. I serve on the board of the Latinx History Project, LHP, here in the metropolitan DC area. And there, you know, they pulled together a fundraiser to disperse funding amongst queer families, queer immigrant families, many of which, you know, are not getting stimulus checks because they're married or in some type of union with, you know, an individual who's undocumented or, you know, or has a different status. And so, you know, their entire families are disqualified from receiving government assistance during this time, right? There are funds that I've seen in the last couple of weeks that have raised millions of dollars. Donating to a GoFundMe or, you know, a Facebook fundraiser doesn't require you to leave your house, and it has an impact. I think you need to do your homework first to know where you're donating, but it has a huge impact. We've seen millions of dollars raised for, you know, just a wide range of different demographics during this hard time. So I encourage folks to look into those as well. If you go on any of these fundraising sites and you cross-reference a specific demographic that you would like to support, or a specific region that you would like to support, or profession, you're going to find the fundraiser. Whether they're health professionals or restaurant workers or undocumented folk, queer folk, you're going to find a way to support them.
Definitely. I definitely agree with everything you just mentioned, Jose. It's very important that we keep in mind that we still can do a lot from our homes, and we have seen the impact. We've seen lots of fundraisers and GoFundMes on social media, everywhere, right? And like with the Black Lives Matter movement, we're seeing a lot posted on social media, and it's showing us the impact that our words and our resources can have virtually. So I definitely hope that, you know, and I'm pretty sure we'll still keep this even after COVID-19, but it's super important that we do our best now to help as much as we can, because we're just a couple months away from the election, and we got to register our Latinx folks, we got to register our grandmothers and our relatives and our neighbors, and we can do so from our house. So I just wanted to pull up some information and some links that we compiled for you guys. Jose will be pulling it up shortly, but we can also share this with you all once the webinar is over.
Can you let me know if this is sharing? I just want to make sure before I move forward.
Yes, it is
Okay,
sharing,
perfect.
yes.
Awesome. Oh, lost my mouse. There we go. How do I? There we go. Of course, I'm the one that has the technical difficulties. Trying to move the slide forward. Let's see. Do I lost my mouse? My computer's acting up a little bit. Jasmin, you might need to pull up the, oh, there we go. There we go, okay.
Yes.
Sorry, folks. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a need right now to get involved, and there's a need right now to make sure that you're giving back. I think in the two avenues that we were discussing, community organizing and political campaigning, there are avenues for the Latino community to get involved. Whether you look at national or regional, we included some national, and one organization here, two organizations here in the DMV, since this is with the DMV chapter, to get involved, right? I mean, you have organizations like LULAC, which has members all over the United States and Puerto Rico, working on a various range of community issues, fundraising during this time, political campaigning to a certain degree. You have the Latinx History Project, which is working with coalitions of queer Latinx groups all over the United States and Puerto Rico, trying to uplift queer Latinx voices and support folks with also funds during this time. Hispanic Federation, which also organizes on a national level, and here in the DMV you have CASA, or formerly Casa Maryland, which works in the tri-state area, and I believe also in Pennsylvania, to provide resources for the Latinx community. Whether it's that you need the resources and you need to reach out to these organizations for support, or that you're looking to give back time, money, or some sort of skill that you might be able to bring to the table, reaching out to the organizations is an excellent first step. And you can do that without having to physically go anywhere. On the political campaigning side, that's something that's still growing within the Latino community. And I say that as someone that was working, at this, on this front with the Bernie campaign. We need more. We need more, Latino organizers, community leaders who are working in this realm. I think now we're having some folks awaken to, the reality of the Latino electorate's importance, especially after the Nevada primary and the California primary, where we saw the Latino vote play such an important role. Specifically within the Democratic Party and their primaries. But there are organizations that you can get involved with, right? There's Voto Latino if you want to, work with within their structures and their membership structure to register Latinos to vote and to get content out there to your community. They have some great tools and resources that you can use on their website to do just that, right? To make sure that you're going out into your community, not physically, but that you're reaching out to your community and getting folks ready for this November election, because it's going to be an incredibly important election for our community. There's, Latino Victory, which if you want to run for office as a Latino, or you want to get involved with, different campaigns, they also have resources that you can, look into to get involved politically. I also would keep an eye out for a new organization that's coming out of one of our senior staff members from the Bernie campaign, Nuestro PAC, which is, an organization that's going to be focused on working within, this larger leadership network that was built within the Latinx community as a part of the Bernie campaign, and figuring out how do you continue to activate Latinos, right? We don't want to lose momentum that we build. We want to make sure that we're adding to that and developing that further, so that the Latino electorate, our issues in our community, continue to be talked about as we approach November. And that's really up to us and our mobilization. If we're there, if we're present, if we're organizing, we're gonna make our issues relevant, and bring them forward to be discussed. And so these are the avenues that I would really suggest folks look into, and others. I mean, I think you said it very well, Jasmin. Folks can go through their Facebook friends and direct them to an online register to vote link, right? It's there's a lot of avenues, whether you have 10 minutes, an hour, or 10 hours that you want to devote to try to make a difference.
Yeah, I also would like to mention that if you want to get involved directly with a certain campaign, you can do so. You just have to go to the candidate's website, and there it'll ask you a couple of questions. Email, a couple like your name and your phone number, and then you submit it, and then they'll connect you with someone who can either help you phone bank or canvass. But in this situation, obviously due to COVID, we can't canvass, but we can do different things. And they will direct you to different volunteer opportunities in your home state. And I also wanted to mention that if we have any CHCI alumni on this webinar, it is super important that you connect to your local chapter, because your local chapter is doing a lot of great work. The DC chapter is hosting webinars right now because, due to COVID, we can't, go out and have events, but we're over here talking about really important things that we should really be discussing, even while we're social distancing, even during COVID-19. And I also, my last point, I wanted to talk a little bit about my work with LULAC, and Jose also can chime in afterwards about it, but that's how I was able to really do a lot of great work on my college campus. And I know that some of our attendees are going off to college next year, or some are still in high school. And I think that it's super important to start young. I started at the age of 14, and it has changed my life. Like, I organized Virginia when I was very young, and since then I still felt a desire to continue to organize. So I did so in college because it was absolutely necessary. I was one Latina out of 50 in my undergrad institution. It was necessary to talk about Latinx issues. It was necessary to talk about issues that impacted POCs. And when I was in college, we were having a presidential election, and we really needed to register people to vote. So we organized voter registration drives. We got people out to the polls. We volunteered at the polls so that we could translate for the Spanish-speaking community in Westminster. And I definitely think that if you can get connected to LULAC, you don't have to be Latino to get connected to LULAC. Let me tell you that too. My council is one of the most diverse councils in the nation. And I'm very proud of that. And we have people from all different backgrounds. And I definitely think that if you really want to do a lot on your college campus, you can. And LULAC will provide you with the resources and help guide you. And Jose and I can help guide you in any way that we can. We can help you start a chapter if you don't have a chapter. But I definitely think that it's so valuable to have LULAC as a resource, because they're at the forefront of a lot of issues in marches, protests, leading a lot of important discussions, and just getting young Latinos to do work in their community. And I think that's very valuable. So if anyone wants to get involved, please reach out to me or Jose after this webinar so that we can talk more. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about our work, Jose, with LULAC.
I think I want to maybe bring it back to one of the things we said at the beginning, and it's, that it's also very important for us to show up as allies. And I say allies not to erase the very, diverse and beautiful Afro-Latinx community, but I mean allies for the rest of us. Latinos, non-Afro-Latinx Latinos need to be allies for the Black community in this country and in the world right now. And that doesn't mean that, you know, we can speak for the community. It doesn't mean that, you know, we can claim to know their struggle, unless you are Afro-Latinx. But we need to show up and support. And I'll use, you know, one reference to further drive that point home, and it's that the woman that got herself arrested and made national news when she climbed to, you know, the foot of the Statue of Liberty to protest children in detention centers was a Black woman. So I don't, you know, I don't appreciate, you know, when I hear some folks say, you know, we need to focus on our community issues, or, you know, where is the mutual support? The mutual support is there. And so we need to make sure that we're present as strong allies when we're called upon, because that has been demonstrated to us time and time again. And if that's something that you're lacking education in and you need further education to have proof of that, by all means, look into that, but don't fail to show up, because we're only strong when, you know, we stand together. And so I just really want to drive that point home.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you so much. I personally also do a lot of intersectionality work and coalition building. So if that's something you're also interested, please let us know. I found that work was most impactful in college because we had a lot of people of color who were trying to make their voice heard on a predominantly white campus. So I definitely think that doing a lot of work with different communities in college and organizing different protests and marches on campus was super beneficial, and in the end helped us build a lot of coalitions and helped us have a lot of talks about intersectionality. So I really love that you mentioned that, Jose, and I encourage everyone to organize with other groups, either in college or if you're in the professional world, having conversations about how we can work together. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now. And I definitely think that we should work together, but definitely not take the conversation, the right word for this would be not lead the conversation if we're not meant to lead it, if that makes sense. We need to give space to those who should lead the conversation. And now I want to open it up to a couple of questions. I saw a comment from someone from Poland that is awesome. Yes, I think that's amazing that we had someone tune in from Poland. I think it was one of my sister's friends. I see a question here. It says, can you speak more about the nuances of privilege that impact allyship? White, cis documented privilege, English dominance, formal education. Do you want to start it off, Jose?
Sure. I think that the very, you know, the very first comment that should be made is, as Latinos, there is disenfranchisement, right? And there is oppression that our community members experience in this country and in other countries too. That does not mean that we don't also have privileges, right? Each individual has different demographic compositions that make up their privilege and, you know, their identity. And I can speak for myself as, you know, an immigrant from Mexico, first generation American and first generation college educated, as a, you know, gay man, as a person that's somewhere in that spectrum of, you know, mestizo. I recognize that, you know, I am not a white man and I don't have the privileges of a white man or a white woman, but I am also not a Black person in America, you know, and I'm not a straight person in the United States either, right? And so everyone has different identities that make up their whole, and we need to recognize that those identities sometimes come with privileges. And I'm very vocal about this, and I want to keep the conversation light. But you know, I got into a conversation recently with someone on social media about something that I posted regarding, you know, privilege, um, and and I think it brought up a question from this individual that's very important to also recognize, right? You having privilege as a white person or a straight person or a college educated person or you know, any of these other identifiers, a person with legal, you know, certain legal status in the United States, that doesn't mean that you don't struggle, right? You can be a white man and have struggle in your life in the United States, right? But as a white man, the color of your skin is not one of the things you have to worry about in this country, right? Your legal status, unless you're, you know, an immigrant, is not something you have to worry about in that identity and struggle, right? And so it's important to recognize that. Saying that you need to recognize your privilege does not mean that you had everything handed to you in life. It very much does not mean that. Because we all have privileges and we all have, you know, struggles. But you need to recognize that some of the things that, you know, maybe aren't, you know, things that you have to think about as a part of your struggles are things that other people do because that's who they are, right? And so without getting too much into that conversation, that's really where we have to, you know, self-analyze as Latinos, right? If you're a Latino and you're not, you know, Afro Latinx, you're not an immigrant, you can still support, you know, these different communities, the Black community, the immigrant community. I think a lot of Latinos do support the immigrant community, but don't take up space, you know, and don't take a voice, right, from someone that has lived experience to that struggle that should be at the forefront of moving that ball forward, right? And so I think privilege is very complicated, right? But we all have it. And that doesn't mean we don't struggle, right? It just means that certain things are not a part of our struggle, right? And we need to recognize that and recognize that certain things are a part of other people's struggle and validate that. I hope that did a good job of talking to the point.
Yeah, I think you put it beautifully, Jose, and thank you so much for that. I wanted to, it was a comment in the Q&A part, but what was mentioned is that would be really, so she said, thank you for the super interesting discussion. That would be really needed in Poland at the moment too, as we are also facing election challenges in the pandemic. So I definitely think if you aren't seeing these conversations in Poland, have them yourself or connect to people who can talk about the topic and have a discussion. I think that would be very important, and especially if it's super necessary at the moment, definitely go ahead and have them virtually. But thank you so much for that comment. It's really amazing to see that we have people from all around the world joining us today. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, I want to close it out. Thank you so much, Jose, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us here today.
I think I just got one question. It says,
oh, okay.
I found that, it says, I've found that Twitter is a great way for me to connect with local advocacy efforts Do you have
Okay.
any other suggestions on where to get connected online? And I think we can answer that question here.
Yes.
I think Twitter is absolutely a great avenue for, engagement. And I was on Twitter last night, and you see these things trend in real time, right? Of issues that are coming up or things that people are talking about because they're important, right? I think that you can do that with a lot of different social media, and it really depends on your generation, the specific demographic that you're working within. I think, again, we kind of see those generational divides come into play with those different social media platforms, right?
Yeah.
Where we see that Gen Xers, late millennials are really focused on Facebook platforms. Some of the baby boomers have really caught on to that as well, and started to grasp some of that that organizing capacity within Facebook. I think Twitter has a lot of different communities, but it's kind of siloed depending on what kind of profile you create for yourself within the platform. Instagram is younger, right? Younger millennial, Gen Z. Snapchat, I think, has kind of faded off into the distance. And I mean no offense to Snapchat, but it depends, right? I think it depends on where you find community naturally, as to how you can engage with some of these online platforms. And I'm a big nerd when it comes to digital organizing. It's something that I'm learning to grow into now. Just a couple months ago, I formally started this process of creating, with my web background, creating a new digital platform, a news content platform to connect young Latinos all over the United States and Latin America. And so, I'm doing that, and I'm working on that this year because I want to build a platform where young leaders like us can come together and talk about the issues in California on gentrification, and relate that to gentrification in in the city of Medellin, Colombia, right? There's these connections to be made amongst our young leaders on a larger scale that I saw a need to focus on. And so that's what I'm focusing on. If you don't see something that is working for you in your organizing capacity, maybe you want to try to create a platform, right? We'll see how that goes for me, and I'll keep you all updated.
Thank you, Jose. I also wanted to mention that something I've noticed as people are organizing for the upcoming election, people have been reaching out to me via email, and it just shows the generational divide that we are seeing in the country in regards to the different candidates we have running for office. And I think that I personally am connected to these folks because I've done a lot of organizing in Virginia throughout the years, but I think it makes it super hard for folks who aren't as connected and want to be. And I think that, in the state that you are, you should look for folks who are active on the ground and might be a little bit older. That's how I've been able to get connected to the candidate that I personally want to see in office. So I think that is an avenue to go as well. Try connecting via email. If you see that they post something about a press conference coming up for the candidate that you want to organize for, connect with them immediately, because I've seen that it's becoming via email, right? Things are being sent via email, and it's so interesting, right? Because Jose and I are both millennials, and we're used to seeing things on Facebook and Instagram, not
on
via
the younger
email.
end of the millennial spectrum.
Yeah. And so we are seeing things on other social media platforms, not email. But I think that we should definitely reach out to those who are organizing these different events to try to get connected with the candidate that we want to organize for. So I see that we have another question, Jose. It says, there's a lot of information and misinformation online. How well do you think organizers are currently handling it? You can go first, Jose.
I think that is also very generation specific. I didn't mean to butt in, but you know, I think it's something that we also need to recognize, right? It comes with different generations. It's not, you know, trying to, you know, make assumptions or make a, you know, an assumption on someone's capacity who's a part of, you know, the baby boomer generation or the later millennial generation, Gen X. But you and I, Jasmin, you know, we grew up, you know, as this technology, you know, these platforms were really developing, right? And so I think there's almost like a trained eye that has kind of evolved to identify, you know, fake news or photoshopped. I can't tell you how many times I come across, you know, fake information, photoshopped information that to me is just, it's so obviously fake, and yet, you know, to another generation it's not, because they don't have that same exposure to just train the eye, I think, to know, right? If you're looking at the URL and it's, you know, just something, it's a publication you've never heard of, you may want to, you know, take a second look before you share information about a political candidate. If a photo is grainy and skin tones don't match on an individual that's being, you know, talked about in a negative way, then maybe their head is photoshopped and the, you know, it's misinformation. Like that happens, right? And now there are, you know, these softwares that, you know, can really actually very, you know, accurately put, you know, different a different voice and different facial gestures over an existing video, you know, to make us think that and there was a famous one that was out just a couple of years ago that, you know, President Barack Obama said XYZ, and the video was completely fake, but the editing was so good, and some of these softwares are getting, you know, so good that it was actually kind of hard to tell for everybody. And so it's this really tricky thing about just knowing where your news is coming from, right? Like knowing who you follow. Who you follow on social media that's going to have an impact on what you see, right? And you should always be looking at, okay, what did I just listen to? What did I just, you know, watch, or what did I just read, and where's it coming from? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there. We're seeing it right now, you know, as these protests are you know, continuing all over the country. There's a lot of misinformation out there about, you know, this and that, and you know, the communication is just, it's tricky, and it's something that we are going to have to deal with if digital organizing is going to continue into the future. We just really have to know where we're getting our news, right? And I think Twitter is taking an excellent step forward by flagging misinformation or dangerous information. That's a personal opinion of mine. So I commend them for that decision. I think it's incredibly important when social media is playing such an important role in our democracy and in all democracies across the world today.
Thank you, Jose. We have 1 more minute, so I'm gonna close everything out. We hope everyone enjoyed the webinar and took away something important from watching it. Jose and I worked really hard to make sure that this webinar was fantastic. We are so happy to have seen so much enthusiasm from all of you, and to have seen people chime in from across the world, actually. I will be hosting my next webinar on June 20th, and it's going to be called Designing the Foundation for Your Next Job. It'll be focused on basically finding your next job and what that entails, and values and stuff that you want incorporated in that. But I will be sending more information about that, and I'm also organizing a next webinar with the organizer from the Black Lives Matter movement. So stay tuned for that. But thank you so much for joining us. We hope you guys liked it. Thank you. Bye, everyone.